Administration. The time is 12:04 p.m. on Tuesday, the 22nd of February in the year of 2022. We are meeting virtually via Zoom to convene a performance oversight hearing for FY21 and FY22 to date for the Office of Tenant Advocate and the Housing Finance Agency. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive public and government witness testimony regarding the performance of these agencies to date. I am asking that the public witnesses keep their remarks to 3 minutes or less for individuals and 5 minutes for organizations. Having said that, I'd like to note that your entire written testimony will be a part of the record and can be sent to housing@dccouncil.us. We'll begin today's hearing with the Office of the Tenant Advocate. Following their testimony, we will turn to the Housing Finance Agency. The Office of the Tenant Advocate and the district's housing finance agencies are two of the most important housing agencies under the jurisdiction of the committee. Both are independent agencies. The Tenant Advocate is a strong and influential voice on behalf of tenants' rights in the district, and her office plays a vital role in ensuring that all tenants are treated fairly and in compliance with the law. The mission of OTA is provide technical advice and other legal services to tenants regarding disputes with landlords, educate and inform the tenant community about tenant rights and rental housing matters, advocate for the rights and interests of district tenants in the legislative, regulatory, and judicial contexts, and provide financial assistance to displaced tenants for certain emergency housing and tenant relocation expenses. In addition, OTA is wrapping up a nearly 2-year technical project to upgrade and modernize the publicly accessible rent control housing clearinghouse or database. We look forward to receiving an update from the Chief Tenant Advocate on the progress of this important project. The Housing Finance Agency was established in 1979 as a corporate body with a legal existence separate from the district government, as mentioned, to stimulate and expand homeownership and rental housing opportunities for low and moderate income families. The Housing Finance Agency issues taxable and tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds to lower the cost of financing single-family housing and of acquiring, constructing, and rehabilitating rental housing. In addition, the Housing Finance Agency administers the issuance of 4% low-income housing tax credits to achieve its affordable housing preservation, rehabilitation, and development goals, and in support of the mayor's goal of building 36,000 additional housing units by 2025, of which 12,000 would be affordable. We look forward to reviewing the performance of both agencies today. At this time, I will pause to recognize any of my colleagues for their brief opening statement.
Looks like nobody else is here from the committee, Councilmember.
All right, and recognizing that we're soloing right now, therefore we will move on to receive the testimony from the Office of Tenant Advocate, starting first with our public witnesses. As you know, each year the Office of Tenant Advocates assists thousands of district tenants and often serves as a last resort for some of the district's most vulnerable populations. The office also has been tasked with establishing a rent control housing clearinghouse, which is due to be completed by the 31st of March 2022. And this database includes data on all of the district's rent control housing stock and will be a valuable tool in assessing the current state of rent control in the district. Additionally, the Office of Tenant Advocate plays a critical role in all matters pertaining to rental housing and will be critical as we look at reforms across the board to areas such as rent stabilization, TOPA, and other affordable housing policies and tools. We're first going to hear from the public witnesses, and I think we can take all three as a panel. Rob Lido, Brian Lederer, and Tom Gregory. I see Mr. Gregory.
I'm sorry, I'm listed as DC Tenac. It's an old ID that I have. I'm Rob Liardo. Can you hear me? So just to identify myself.
I think we have Mr. Lido.
Oh, okay. All right. Again, sorry. Pardon me for my not having my camera. It isn't working that well. All right, and I'll begin. Thank you, Councilmember Bonds and other members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. As this is an oversight hearing, we'd like to first thank Chief Tenant Advocate Joanna Shreve, Legislative Director Joel Cohn, General Counsel Dennis Taylor, and the rest of OTA for the valuable service they've done for tenants. Tenants need OTA. Even members of TENAC and other tenants critical of OTA have recounted the superb work their legal and other staff have rendered in cases of settled law and other matters of tenant advocacy. We're especially grateful for the role OTA has played in helping tenants navigate the pandemic. Specifically, they're working with the other branches of government to prevent the mass eviction crisis that would have taken place without their work with the executive and judicial branches to ensure tenants stay in their homes, essentially by an eviction freeze, among other emergency measures. We thank OTA for making known to all extensively on their website and via phone the details of tenant protections and emergency legislation enacted for the COVID crisis. In addition, OTA has made itself available every time to answer questions about both settled law and proposed legislation. For this, we're grateful. Now is the time to seek solutions to fully fund the need tenants face against the ongoing threat of an eviction crisis that still remains after the closure of Stay DC. We're confident that OTA, working with the executive and legislative branch and the nonprofit agencies, can help fashion a remedy to finish the job Stay DC and emergency legislation was designed to do that ERAP is inadequate to perform. Okay, now we have just some suggestions, several recommendations for changes to better advocate for tenants' rights and ensure the protections of those rights. First, we suggest that OTA compose and post on their website issue briefs and white papers easily accessible to tenants and all on the issues and problems tenants face, as well as positions on proposed legislation. These position papers would ideally be written in plain English, translating from legalese the issues complexities that laymen find hard to understand. As an example, we cite Chief Tenant Advocate Shreve's letter to the council recommending reducing the onerous 30% rent increases for vacant apartments and rent control properties to 10 and 20%, depending on a prior occupant's length of tenancy. That letter, with a small explanation of the law then in effect and what the proposed legislation, which eventually passed, would do, is again a prime example. Position papers so posted and available to all would serve as a quick reference to council members on where OTA stands on legislation being considered. Then there would be little question in council members' minds and in the minds of the public on the issues. More so, it would clear up any confusion that could easily occur on the issues, and also clear up false or misunderstood claims by the landlord lobby. It would also assure tenants by seeing plainly what the issues are and OTA defending them. The white papers could also be used to prepare tenants on the issues and help them across the board from what course to pursue, what to advocate for, and what to inform their fellow tenants and tenants associations of. For this reason, we would ask the council to consider adding 1 or 2 more full-time positions to OT staff as need determines for this task to help fulfill the public's and tenants' right to know. As is famously quoted, perhaps attributed mistakenly to Jefferson, an informed citizenry is the best safeguard for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, Brian Lederer. Mr. Lederer, you're up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. I appreciate the opportunity, council member, to testify. I think this is a really important hearing, as important as any, because the economy of DC is dependent on the health of rental housing. And unfortunately, we have been subject to imperialist activists like Equity Residential that come in and are exploiting weaknesses that the council can fix legislatively. We have a unique rental housing law. No state has a rental housing law as protective of the community, and it was passed by the council to protect the rental housing community, which is most of DC. So there are a couple things. So you have the authority to do this. It's been found constitutional as an expression of the public interest of DC, which is majority rental housing. So I would use your authority to pass certain legislation. First, you got to fix the courts. The courts are not functioning. I'm an experienced landlord and tenant lawyer. I go down in front of the courts. The judges don't know the law. Most of the lawyers are untrained. This is a very technical law, and it's a problem. And then the judges are disrespectful. Second is you got to fix evictions. Now, the council for commercial clients, I mean, you put a moratorium on rental residential evictions for good reason because of COVID. But we have commercial tenants, such as situations that are engaging in criminal public nuisance, like on Georgia Avenue, and these people are living there. The commercial dependents, and the court won't deal with it. So you got to fix eviction so that it helps commercial landlords. Then I would say eliminate legislatively this thing called economic interest deeds. Most of the property now is not owned by the people who purport to own it, like Equity Residential. And they came up with this idea of buying the economic interest in the property without buying the property, such as Equity Residential did at Van Ness South, where I live, 3003 Van Ness. The property is still owned by Smith Property Holdings at 96 feet, and I think the council would be shocked to find out how much of the real property in DC is owned by landlords' rental property with economic interest deeds, whose whole purpose was to avoid helping tenants. So I would eliminate them retroactively wholesale. And then finally, I would strengthen the office of the tenant advocate. It is quite an office. It was modeled after the Office of People's Counsel, which deals with utilities. But Johanna Shreve, you know, from my personal knowledge, is a real go-getter, a warrior, and you need to provide the ability of this office to really function the same way that the office of the People's Council finally got their resources through the assessment authority, that where the utilities fund it and then they recover it in rates. She shouldn't be funded out of taxpayers, but out of the transactional thing. So that's what I would say. These things can be done legislatively. I'm on the Ward 3 Democratic Committee. I'm former chair. I'm former People's Council. I'm former representative for the Congressman Senator Spark Matsunaga and Senator McGovern. I mean, I know how this stuff works, and I really applaud the council and Chairperson Bonds and the committee for willing to step up and do what the city needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And now we will turn to Mr. Gregory.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations. I don't know when I've heard the DC Council hearing start on time, and you were almost right on the minute, so way to go. My name is Tom Gregory. My home is an apartment here in DC where I've lived for over 40 years. For years, I've worked with OTA staff on a number of activities and have witnessed areas of performance that have led to my repeated applause, but also some areas that have long needed improvement. What I'm saying in the next few minutes is somewhat of a repeat of some testimony of the last few years. I'm repeating it because I've not been able to get a direct answer to my issues, and I have not seen the Housing Committee raise these issues with OTA on these hearings, and I hope you will do so today. In my role as part of the Tenant Association of 4000 Mass Avenue for decades, I'm grateful for the significant assistance from OTA in our attempts to resist the huge capital improvement petitions targeting the renters of our building. Of course, in spite of OTA's excellent legal work, the biased DC laws allowed landlords to require us tenants to pay extra for major maintenance, literally millions of dollars, which the landlord's building needed. My role as principal of OTA, Tenant Association, the DC Tenants Advocacy Coalition, I also have some concerns regarding OTA. Years ago, DC tenants were suffering from continually rising rents, and often from poor services from landlords, and from undue landlord influence upon the DC government. The landlords had a lobbyist for every 2 council members. Sound familiar? It should. These situations continue still today. OTA, the Office of the Tenant Advocate, was created by the tenant advocacy community, teaming up with a forward-looking council member and a number of other citizen-caring council members in an attempt to even the playing field. Renters tend to work during the day and don't have time to lobby the council. And OTA was to be for tenants at least what the landlord lobbying organization was for landlords. We had high hopes for great advocacy and for improvement, but the basic problems persist today. Where are those major improvements? Rent costs in rent control units still go up more than inflation. By law, every year, and sometimes multiple times inflation. The percentage of apartment buildings under rent control is still dropping year by year, as well as the actual number. Firefighters, police, teachers are still moving out of DC because renting here in DC is too expensive and steadily getting worse through DC law. In addition to the general lack of tenant major legislative successes, in addition to major legislative failures, take a look at the OTA website. Where is a list of rental housing issues? The many needed legislative changes. And why is each change needed? And what are the arguments for and against each one? Where are the many needed position papers and talking points? Where is a list of what is expected next from the landlords in their quests? And what can be done and is being done to combat those unfulfilled expectations? Where is a list of each council member along with their position and vote on the major rental housing issues, and a schedule of their public appearances where questions are permitted, and what questions need to be asked of those council members? Some tenant advocates wonder if OTA has identity problems with the understandable difficult task of their being created to be the main tenant advocate on one hand, but also being a DC government office, mainly with this mayor, and having possible built-in conflicts of interest. OTA is supposed to be an independent organization with goals of advocacy for fairness for tenants. But with executive nomination and executive reappointments of the chief tenant advocate, is such independence likely or even possible? Of course, no one expects or asks OTA to do everything by themselves, but with the moral arguments being so much on the side of the tenants, the successes coming from OTA should be much more significant. In closing, how can OTA be equipped and coached and guided and reconfigured and programmed to succeed in reaching the major goals for which OTA was created? Some type of substantial correction action evidently is necessary to obtain from OTA the intended influence for fairness for renters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregory, for your testimony. I hope staff can remove the echo, please. Okay, is it better? Yes. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your testimony, and your glowing remarks, and your points of interest for improvement. As you were talking, I was remembering and pulling my data that shows some of the work of the Office of Tenant Advocate. And I wanted to start with Mr. Gregory and just ask, you are indicating that because the agency was created, at least in your mind, as the advocate arm for tenants, you're feeling that it's not an effective vehicle for tenants. Is that basically what you're informing us? You're okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right, sure.
Back when OTA did not exist, we tenants were horribly outpowered, outgunned, with all of the advocates, all of the lobbyists, by the tenants, by the lobbyists of the landlord organization, AOBA. And when we would talk to council members, they would say that, oh, they hear from AOBA lobbyists all the time. In fact, more than they want to. And that doesn't seem to have changed. And I hear from some council members that, yes, they favor landlords because they don't hear that much from tenants. And the representation is one-sided, and so they vote one-sided. OTA was supposed to change all of that. It hasn't. You ask people who don't live in the district and people who do live in the district, do you think it's fair for the district to have laws that say that even under rent control, the rents go up more than inflation every year? And it sounds like it's only a little bit, 2%, but it gets compounded 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And within a few years, that rent increase is double inflation and then triple inflation. And it's easy to graph out, it's easy to show And people say, no, that couldn't be the district. And then you tell them, oh, by the way, the district government has put into place that if a landlord isn't making 12% return on his investment in rental property, that's a hardship. And he can raise rent without limit until he gets that 12%. Well, not only does that not apply to the rest of us, and I would like to see you and all the rest of the council put into law that each person, each in the District of Columbia is guaranteed 12% return on their investments. Probably not likely to happen, but it would be nice. But it's that type of one-sidedness that was the reason OTA was created. And if you look on the website, why are there not the issues that are needed to be changed? Why are there not a clear representation of what is so unfair? There is just so much lacking that could be done, I think, without that much effort. But yes, what you're hearing from me is valid.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Gregory. As you and I know, I don't, well, at this moment, I do not have the law before me that created OTA. So I cannot speak specifically to the exact understanding that the council had at that particular time in creating OTA, but I do have before me the mission statement, and it doesn't necessarily say that it is the lobbyists for the tenants before the council. I'll read it again: provide technical advice and other legal services to tenants regarding disputes with landlords, educate and inform the tenant community about tenant rights and rental housing matters, advocate for the rights and interests of tenants in legislative, regulatory, and judicial contexts, and then finally provide financial assistance to displaced tenants for certain emergency housing and tenant relocation expenses. Perhaps you are thinking about the advocate for the rights and interests of district tenants in legislative, regulatory, and judicial contexts. And so what we will do when Ms. Shreve has her opportunity to testify this afternoon, we will hear from her as to the many different activities that office undertakes. And I thank you for your testimony, and we'll try to get to the root of this as to how this agency actually advocates on behalf of the tenants of the District of Columbia. So we will be poised on understanding that for sure. Mr. Leverer, you mentioned that you're concerned about a particular process that is ongoing where leasing entities come into the city, and they, instead of actually purchasing a property, they purchase the economic interest. There's something called economic interest deeds. Can you explain that a little more, please?
I'm sorry, council member, that was enacted by the council in 2007 at behalf of the landlords to get around tenant rights.
All right, and so can you explain how that really works, please?
Yeah, it's very simple. You created a legal mechanism that they call a deed that isn't a deed. A deed under law school law is conveyance of property. It was intended to commit TOPA fraud to allow the financial interest to buy control of rental property without buying the rental property, and thereby give TOPA rights. So you have, for example, 3003 Van Ness. The landlords came to the council, got emergency legislation, and said that the tenant rights were hurting the rental market. So they got emergency legislation to allow them to sell control of the property without controlling the property, without owning the property. That was called the economic interest deed. It was intended as fraud on TOPA. That was passed in 2007. Most of the property in DC now, much of the rental property is run by people who don't own it. And so TOPA's been, effectively eviscerated. You can resolve that issue. And my building is a perfect example. The building is owned by Smith Property Holdings, LLP, by a deed in June of '96. But then you notice in the land records, there were 2 additional deeds, an economic interest deed in 2007, where Smith did something with Archstone, and then Archstone in 2013, where they did it to Equity. Equity no more owns the property than I own Grand Central Station. And what they're doing is they're collecting the rents. So you need to, get rid of that. And, tenants are really being hurt by that. And that's then allowed the rents. That's the other thing I just wanted to tell you. The reason the rents are so high in the city is because the landlords exploited the abolition of rent ceilings. And for example, I got a rent increase, 2 of them on the same day for my apartment, one being $1,500 higher than the other one. The higher one I got first, and then I went into the office and said, "What is this?" And they said, "Oh, sorry." I said, "Take my lease, multiply it times the CPI, and my rent is this, which is $1,500 lower." But what they had done is when the rent ceilings were abolished in 2006, is the landlords made tenants illegally sign new leases and adopted the rent ceiling. So the city is being eviscerated by rents that are 50% above the market. So the council can simply pass legislation that abolishes all those rents, go back to the rent administrator and reestablish rents at what they should have been if you took what the rents were in 2006 and then just play it out on the CPI and then amend all the rents. You can do that legislatively, and then we would have reasonable rents in the city, and that would solve both problems.
I thank you very much. I think that's a very exciting idea, and we're going to hear from OTA, as we're also going to hear from a couple of the other housing agencies.
I wanted to support OTA too. OTA was created after the Office of People's Counsel. It's an advocacy office, not a legislative office. Okay, and it is really without parallel as an advocacy. It's to help tenants deal with the rental housing litigation process. It was modeled after the Office of People's Counsel. And I know that because the council member who founded it, who pushed it, the Ward 2 council member that Mr. Cohen worked for, told me that. And I helped them write the legislation. I know what it's about. And it's not to lobby, but to represent tenants in the litigation process. And at that point, they are excellent. Okay, I had a tenant petition and they helped me through it. And when Equity and Smith before that were doing some unconscionable things, and they got a $60,000 refund through 16 years of litigation, and they paid all my legal fees. You need to fund OTA to do this. This is unbelievably good. It's very hard litigation. you know, it's very hard. It's very technical litigation. You know, the average lawyer doesn't know how to do it. Most of the judges in the court don't have a clue how this is a uniquely technical law to protect rental housing. And so these are things that the council can fix legislatively. And I'm very grateful to the council for listening to us. And I know the council has the heart with a proper legislative record to solve it legislatively. The last thing I want to say, when I was People's Counsel, I found all the arguments were best solved by coming to the council, having a legislative record as you're developing here, and then writing a law that reflects the evidence in the testimony. And then you don't need litigation. And you can eliminate economic interest deeds legislatively. You can strengthen the tenant advocate legislatively. You can strengthen the court legislatively, and really bring vitality to the city in rental housing. And you can do it. And, you know, we'll all help do it. Okay? Enough.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to at least get to Mr. Leardo because he was very clear in that he would like to see some very specific information on the website. And if he is still with us, if he could maybe give us an example. I think he said, Mr. Leardo, are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm here. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us an example of what you would think would help on the website? As you said, you wanted to see issues as well as positions that would be placed on the website. I mean, what's your image of the documents? How would they be presented?
Well, I would think that, well, maybe if they get, they might require another staff member, but for instance, like, let's say we took the omnibus rent control reform bill and broke that up into separate parts, and then you might have like, unfortunately, I say a copy of the bill, but a brief explanation in plain English on what it is attempting to fix, what the problem is, and what it is attempting to fix. Now, of course, OTA, and we all know current legislative proposals and problems, but maybe it might help, it's on legislation introduced, but it might help, for instance, have someone field requests from tenants on what they want to see, legislation they want to see from different advocacy groups like Legal Aid, our group, other groups, and tenants associations, and then put these issues on the website, describe what the problem is briefly. Like, for instance, the law currently, to use Tom's example, the law currently allows for rents above to be raised on rent control properties 2% above inflation. That has been found onerous by tenants. Always, and then we could even have a chart on how rents increase so astronomically, and then that's the problem, and then the solution under that, or the remedy or the proposal, and then repeal the 2%, and perhaps have a chart comparison on what rents would be in 10 to 20 years based on that sort of thing. Now, of course, each different proposal or issue brief or issue would have, depending on what the what the topic is, its own design, like in that instance, charts, in another instance, other illustrations, graphs or photographs.
Okay, thank you very much. Some great ideas. Thank you so very much to the public panel for your testimony today.
May I add one more sentence?
Sure, Mr. Gregory, go right ahead.
Thank you. The horrible problems that tenants have been facing through the years, which were the reasons for the creation of OTA, still exist today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Gregory. Believe it or not, there are some plans in the works that will come to fruition in I'll say in a few days. I believe they'll be before the full council to sort of chew on and make some decisions. I think the pandemic has made it very clear, glaringly so, that things have changed. The economy has changed. And while in the district, our economy is attempting to roar back, we still have people in our community that are hurting, and we have to find a very meaningful way of assisting them. We do not want to lose any of our residents. In fact, it's a pleasure to know that at least in some parts of the city, where population is growing again. And where we have a lot of vacancies, whether it is in rental or ownership properties, we want to backfill with people for the District of Columbia. So that is a genuine goal, a goal of mine, and we have to have some processes in place in order to do that. And protecting the lion's share of the residents of the District of Columbia has to be a great part of that. So I thank you. Thank you all for your testimony this morning. And I mean, this afternoon now, yes, seriously into the afternoon. And we will now move to hearing from the Chief Tenant Advocate, and I will swear Ms. Shreve in. Thank you very much. Thank you. You've got your hand up. Thank you so much. Do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements made before us today are in fact truthful and complete? Thank you. We need to, you're still muted. All righty. Thank you so much.
I do.
All
Thank you, Chairperson Bond, and members of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration for the opportunity to provide testimony on the performance of the DC Office of the Tenant Advocate during fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 to date. I am Johanna Shreve, Chief Tenant Advocate and Director of the Office of the Tenant Advocate. I want to begin by highlighting a couple of issues that are front and center for the tenant community and thus for the agency. As the district emerges from the pandemic, however, just to set the stage, I wish to note first the alarming rise in the number of tenant and tenant associations reporting rent increases that are either unlawful or exorbitant, both in the unregulated rental and rent control markets. Second, deferred maintenance and poor building conditions in all parts of the district. And third, the ongoing need for rental assistance to address the still looming threat of eviction of tenants who continue to have a hard time paying the rent. I will discuss each of these matters in more detail when I talk about our policy priorities. First, I will discuss the FY21 and 22 performance of each of the agency's four programmatic areas. Policy. The policy branch spearheads the mission of the OTA to represent the interests of tenants and tenant organizations in legislative, executive, and judicial issues, including advocating changes in laws and rules. It does so through legislative drafting, policy consultations, council testimonies, comments on rulemakings affecting rental housing and tenant rights, filing amicus curiae briefs in judicial and administrative cases, and litigation consultations, particularly regarding matters of statutory and regulatory interpretation. Some of our accomplishments. The calamitous effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on renters has driven the OTA's top priorities for FY21 and 22. At the outset of the pandemic, the OTA collaborated with both the mayor's office and the committee on a package of tenant protections to include in the district's pandemic response legislation. We appreciate the committee's advocacy for and the council's adoption of a number of the OTA recommendations, including a moratorium on evictions to protect public health and tenant well-being, moratoria on rent increases and late fees to protect tenants in financial turmoil from additional liability and uncertainty, a pause on tenant deadlines under the Rental Housing Act of 1985 and TOPA so that tenants can properly effectuate their rights, a pause on notices of intent to vacate so that tenants whose plans to move change once the pandemic hit were not forced to do so, and a refund of fees for amenities in rent control buildings that were eliminated due to the PHE. The agency has continued to collaborate with the council and other governmental and community partners during the phase out of these protections in FY21 and 22. For example, we appreciate your reinstatement of the tolling of deadlines for the tenant's exercise of certain TOPA rights, as Omicron renewed the difficulties for tenant organizers first created by the coronavirus. While the pandemic required all of us to refocus our priorities, the OTA did not lose sight of the need for continued efforts to strengthen and expand rent control. Having assisted in some of the legislative drafting and research, the OTA also testified for and provided statistical data in support of a number of measures that the council considered early in FY 2021, including Voluntary Agreement Moratorium Amendment Act of 2020, the emergency and temporary legislation placing a moratorium on certificates of assurance, the Rent Concession Amendment Act of 2019, the Rent Stabilization Program Reform and Expansion Amendment Act of 2020, the Substantial Rehabilitation Petition Reform Amendment Act of 2020, the Capital Improvement Reform Amendment Act of 2020, and the Hardship Petition Reform Amendment Act of 2020. The OTA commends the committee's efforts in getting the moratoria on voluntary agreements and certificate of assurance enacted. The OTA also collaborated in the development of important non-pandemic tenant protections enacted through emergency and temporary legislation, for which permanent legislation is now pending. If approved, Bill 24-96, the Eviction Record Sealing and Fairness in Renting Amendment Act of 2022, would make permanent the prohibition on evicting tenants unless the landlord has a valid rental housing license or for non-payment of rent where the unpaid amount is less than $600. The requirement that the tenant be given a 30-day written notice before the landlord may file an eviction action for non-payment of rent, and the requirement of photographic evidence if a court summons is posted at the tenant's unit. The legislation also includes certain tenant screening and record sealing requirements to protect tenants from being unfairly shut out of rental housing opportunities, which can happen on the basis of a single eviction action in the court record, regardless of the outcome of the case. The OTA also appreciates the committee's inclusion of sensible record sealing carve-outs for tenants themselves, their attorneys, and public interest researchers. I look forward to Bill 24-96 clearing a second council vote and becoming effective. Regulatory action. On the regulatory front, the agency's primary focus in FY21 was the Rental Housing Commission's long anticipated overhaul of the Rental Housing Act, implementing regulations at Title 14 at the DCMR. Having participated in the RHC's interagency draft rulemaking process in 2016 and 2017, the OTA also submitted substantive comments on all three proposed rulemakings between 2019 and 2021. The RHC incorporated a number of the OTA's recommendations, including prohibiting outright the unlawful landlord practice of preserving rent adjustments that create a de facto rent ceiling in violation of the statute, and then imposing unconscionable rent increases on the basis of those illegal adjustments. Permitting challenges to the landlord's selective implementation of rent adjustments approved through a housing provider's petition process, which unfairly forces some tenants to bear the landlord's cost recovery burden more than others. And permitting challenges to a capital improvement petition based on horizontal stacking, where the landlord files multiple capital improvement petitions for substantially related work that should be included in a single petition. The effect of which is, when multiple petitions are approved, the landlord may implement corresponding surcharges in successive years, thus evading the one-time 20% per unit statutory cap on surcharges pursuant to a single CI. Collaboration with DOEE around the Building Energy Performance Standards program. Now that the Department of Energy and Environment has issued building energy performance standard regulations, many residential housing owners will need to update their building systems in order to comply with the district's new energy efficiency requirements. As the green buildings legislation itself acknowledges, environmental sustainability and housing affordability are both important public interest goals and should not be at odds with each other. We appreciate DOEE's engagement with the OTA and their thoughtful consideration of the OTA's concerns in this regard. Having provided recommendations to DOEE on the BEPS rulemaking itself and the supplemental guidebook, we are now consulting with DOEE and the Rent Administrator's Office regarding a draft affordable housing covenant that will apply to owners of naturally occurring affordable housing, which includes some rent-controlled properties. The OTA's goal is to help ensure that the owner's affordable housing obligations are as strong and as meaningful as possible. The agency's primary concerns are twofold. We believe that the owner of a rent-controlled building should seek available public funds before resorting to a capital improvement petition that would impose the cost burdens on the tenants. Second, we believe it should be made as clear as possible that such an owner is prohibited from double dipping. In other words, they should not be permitted to both file a CI petition and also receive public funding for the very same purpose. The OTA submitted regulatory comments on the matters in 21 and 22, which included DC's water multifamily assistance program to provide utility bill relief to tenants in multifamily buildings, and DCRA's short-term rental regulations to ensure compliance with laws that discourage owners from converting housing into short-term rentals where it might otherwise be rented to a district resident long-term. Judicial advocacy. The policy branch also participates in the agency's judicial and especially appellate advocacy. In July of 2021, the policy branch filed an amicus curiae brief in a statute of limitations case before the RHC on interlocutory appeal from the Office of Administrative Hearings. The outcome of this case will impact the ability of a tenant in a rent-controlled unit to challenge an exorbitant and unlawful vacancy increase that occurred before the tenant moved in, where the landlord failed to provide the tenant with a rent basis disclosure as the act requires. Our policy and goals for FY22. Number one, rental assistance. Thanks to both federal and local funding, the district distributed $249,779,870 in rental assistance through State EC, assisting 33,931 district households. Despite the availability of unprecedented levels of rental assistance, as many as 42,700 district households are estimated to be at risk of eviction, and approximately 80,600 district households have little or no confidence that they can pay the next month's rent. Based upon the agency's review of Pulse data and other agency data, we estimated that $85,387,100 to $97,110,000 in rental assistance may be needed to keep those tenants currently in arrears from the brink of homelessness. This does not include the future rental assistance needed to support district renters, such as those housing insecure tenants that are not currently in arrears but have low confidence in their ability to pay next month's rent. Further, about 11% of district households that were caught up on rent did apply for rental assistance and were denied. Additionally, an estimated 30% of district households with rental arrears have not applied for rental assistance. Although the Department of Human Services does work with the court to get rental assistance to tenants in eviction proceedings, the council should consider incorporating a permanent statutory requirement that ties the rental assistance process to the eviction process for non-payment of rent. Doing so in combination with increasing ERAP's funding would make sure there is a systematic process in place to help prevent evictions. In the long run, this could provide to be an important eviction diversion tool for the district. More than ever, the scope of the district's rental assistance need is not limited to tenant households that would qualify for ERAP. Thus, I would suggest that the council may want to consider expanding ERAP criteria. As of now, due to recent council revisions to the ERAP program, households must be at or under 40% of the area median income in order to qualify for assistance, whereas state DC assistance was cut off at 80% of the area median income. With some exceptions, ERAP also limits assistance awards at 5 times the respective monthly fair market rent based on household size. Our second priority is strengthening rent control. The OTA continues to support legislative efforts that strengthen rent control, making rent control permanent rather than subject to periodic renewals, limiting the standard annual rent increase to the CPI only, right-sizing the 12% guaranteed return rate under a hardship petition, preventing unlawful preservation of rent adjustments, expanding the stock of rent control housing, and permanently eliminating both voluntary agreements and certificates of assurance. Our third priority. As I mentioned at the start of my testimony, the agency has received an influx of inquiries from tenants in market rate housing who are alarmed by the magnitude of the rent increases issued since the end of the moratorium. They ask us, how can this be legal? Even owners of unregulated units themselves have noted to the OTA that they are disconcerted by the increases that certain counterparts have imposed on their tenants since the rent freeze was lifted at the start of this year. And I might want to say at this point that reading some of our HEDs, one of them I read most recently indicated that the rent increase was $1,300. I would point out that the district already has a retail price anti-gouging law that applies to natural disasters, including public health emergencies. I would further point out that 1, we are just emerging from a PHE, and in many ways, the district remains in the phase-out period. And 2, the DC Court of Appeals has acknowledged that an exorbitant rent hike for an unregulated rent can be unlawful in certain circumstances. I believe the time has come for the district to consider expanding this anti-gouging principle to include market rate rental housing in appropriate circumstances. 4, building conditions. As I also said at the start of my testimony, the OTA is hearing from an increasing number of tenants who are experiencing the impact of deferred maintenance and landlord negligence in the upkeep of their buildings, even in rental accommodations once considered to be luxury buildings in pricier parts of the district. Of course, this is merely an unfortunate continuation and expansion of the long-term experience of far too many tenants in other areas of the district. I believe the committee and the council should consider 1, more efficient and more targeted use of DCRA's nuisance abatement fund, and 2, an expansion of DHCD's small building program. The latter is a version of a recommendation I made as a member of the mayor's 2015 DC Housing Preservation Strike Force and the mayor's 2021 Saving DC's Rental Housing Strike Force. Additionally, as I have long advocated for, the district should insist that housing providers of rent-controlled housing maintain a replacement reserve account. This will help ensure that an appropriate portion of rental revenue is reinvested in the property to address anticipated maintenance and replacement needs. To implement this would also require a landlord to undergo a replacement reserve study, which would provide realistic accounting of both short and long-term building needs. Given the law's generous guaranteed profit under the hardship petition, rent control should not be an excuse for a housing provider's failure to use best business practices regarding building maintenance and the replacement of building systems that have reached the end of their useful life. Our other legislative priorities for FY22 include: we continue to advocate for the maintenance and enhancement of pandemic-related tenant protections, whether related to a reoccurrence of the current pandemic or to a future pandemic. For example, we hear regularly from tenants about enforcement-related concerns with their rental payment plans, from students and new hires in the district regarding their inability to break a lease when pandemic-related circumstances, such as a campus is shut down or a job falling through, negate their reason for moving to a new unit. Rental Housing Act, Section 501F. The OTA has provided the committee with draft legislation to amend Section 501F of the Housing Act to address the rights of tenants who must vacate their units on an emergency basis. Under Section 501F, a landlord cannot evict tenants to make alterations and renovations that can't safely be made while the units are occupied until they have: 1, secured government approval, and 2, given each tenant a 120-day notice to vacate. Section 501F also provides tenants with a number of other rights. In an emergency situation, however, tenants are forced to relocate without the opportunity for a government review and approval of a landlord application, or for the landlord to provide the tenants with a 120-day notice to vacate. Despite DC Court of Appeals case law that is favorable to tenants' rights in such emergency circumstances, the application of other important 501F rights remain arguable, such as the absolute right to return to the unit after repairs are completed, and the right to temporary housing within the landlord's portfolio. Relatedly, the amount of relocation assistance that the landlord is required to provide to affected tenants under Title VII of the Rental Housing Act has not kept pace with the statutory requirement of a reassessment, at least once every 3 years, of a tenant's average moving costs. To be clear, the reassessment has not been done even once. District law currently only provides $300 per room and smaller additional amounts for pantries and etc. This amount pales in comparison to the actual cost of moving, and it has not kept pace with reality. Indeed, we reviewed the Federal Uniform Relocations Act's residential moving expenses payment schedule for 2021, and for the district, it recommends $800 for the first room and generally $200 more for each additional room. We look forward to discussing these matters further with the committee. Further, residential lease reform legislation. Several years ago, the OTA and the committee worked together to protect the tenant's reasonable contractual expectations on a range of issues, such as landlord access to the unit in non-emergency circumstances and mitigation of damages when a tenant has to vacate the unit before the initial lease term is up. The OTA continues to hear tenant complaints on a range of other lease-related matters that we believe warrant further legislation. Examples include perpetual joint and several liability for rent and damages that applies to a co-tenant who, after providing timely notice, moves out of a group home. And 2, requiring a minimum of 45 days notice of a rent increase, or ideally 60 days for month-to-month tenants. While the current provision requires a 30-day notice of a rent increase, this fails to provide the month-to-month tenant with sufficient time to consider whether to stay or move in light of the amount of the rent increase. In general, the OTA sees a great variety of outrageous lease terms and renewal lease practices that warrants the committee's attention. Changes to the OTA's lien authority. I also want to request a change in the OTA's lien authority statute, which relates to the Emergency Housing Assistance Program. Currently, in the event that the housing provider fails to pay the OTA's bill for tenant hotel stays, the OTA may impose a tax lien for a maximum of 30 days. But based on the agency's experience, which I am happy to discuss, we would like this to be changed to 90 days. Now focusing on our legal branch. The legal branch case includes case management, 3 FTEs, legal representation, 7, and the hotline, 1 paralegal specialist who handles Ask the Director and Ask the Mayor correspondence. In FY21 and 22, this branch had a total of 9,456 tenant and tenant association contacts. Of that, 7,527 were handled by attorney advisors and case managers, and 1,929 were handled through the hotline. In FY 2022, the branch had a total of 1,874 tenant and tenant association contacts for the first quarter, and 1,328 were handled by attorney advisors and case managers, and 446 were handled by the tenant hotline. The average number of cases per attorney advisor in FY21 was 574, and the average number of cases per attorney in FY22 for the first quarter has been 146. In FY 2013, the OTA began to collect data regarding the legal team's financial returns to tenants, including damage awards, rent rollbacks, and settlement agreements. And from 2013 to 2021, the legal branch secured the return of a total of $23,778,874 to the tenant community. And in the first quarter of 22, we have given back $385,949. The top issues were housing condition matters and lease issues, with 1,680 and 1,676 new intakes respectively. We also received 393 security deposit matters, 322 TOPA questions, 296 mole complaints to round out the top 5 issues of 2021. And we provided you with a chart that shows you that comparison. Single family TOPA. Under law 22-120, the OTA has the responsibility of receiving copies of any housing provider notice of intent to sell a single family dwelling. The OTA has a statutory duty to send the tenants a letter detailing their rights. The OTA has also assumed the responsibility to review each notice for legal sufficiency and to notify DHCD for further action if we identify a problem. In 2021, OTA reviewed 2,481 single-family TOPA notices. The charts below detail the number of single-family TOPA filings by month and by ward in 2021. It shows that the total number of single-family dwelling TOPA transactions in Ward 1, 2, and 3 alone were 1,450, or about 60% of the total number of such transactions throughout the city. U.S. Marshals Service eviction data. At the request of the U.S. Marshals Office, OTA has been the repository of U.S. eviction data since August of 2018. We have shared this data freely with key government agencies upon their request. And we provide you with a chart that shows you the number of evictions that occurred from September of 2021 through February 16th of 2022. The Vanguard Eviction Diversion Program. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the OTA discussed with government and community partners the need for an eviction diversion program to staunch a seemingly inevitable avalanche of evictions once the public health emergency was lifted. In the FY 2022 budget, as well as the FY 21 supplemental budget, the council provided the OTA with funding for 9 temporary staff positions to help address the eviction crisis. 3 litigating attorneys, 2 paralegals, a triage specialist, and a case administrator. The 2 additional FTEs are located in the education and outreach branch. We have interviewed candidates for 1 of the litigating attorney positions, both paralegal positions, and 1 paralegal specialist. We expect DCHR to soon be extending offers to the identified candidates. Additionally, pursuant to a recently executed memorandum of agreement with the DC Superior Court, the agency now provides us with a weekly list of all eviction filings in the landlord and tenant branch. Per court requirements, the eviction filing information we receive must be kept confidential, and any personally identifiable information must be destroyed within 30 days. The receipt of this information gives the OTA the opportunity to reach out to tenants who are scheduled for eviction case hearings and to invite them to contact the OTA for legal assistance. The current status of district evictions is shown in the chart below, which shows the Marshal Service regarding scheduled evictions for the first 3 months. That should not be there. And now that the number of eviction filings at landlord and tenant court has been lower than anticipated, we believe this is due to landlord uncertainty regarding the proper forms to use and the enhanced requirements of the phase-out law itself regarding the rather involved process of non-payment of rent cases. Still, the rental assistance data I discussed earlier underscores my point that eviction filings to date likely reflect just the tip of the iceberg. Emergency housing assistance. Through the Emergency Housing Assistance Program, the OTA works alongside government and non-government partners to ensure that families affected by emergencies are given a chance to regain housing stability. In FY 2021, the OTA expended $524,380 for the assistance of 298 families. 197 were displaced by fire and 101 was displaced by government closures. In FY22 to date, we have expended $223,227, and we have serviced 137 displaced families, 82 by fire, and 69 displaced by building closures. And I'm hoping to work with the fire department to, particularly during fire month, to issue out small fire extinguishers for kitchens to each one of the families, because I believe it is important that all apartment units have a small fire extinguisher available. Hopefully having the fire department to show how to use those fire extinguishers, being able to recognize the expiration date on them, and to the extent possible, it would be nice to see fire drills happening in some of these buildings. We had a fire last night at 301 G Street on the 3rd floor. 2 people died. We just housed today 17 families in hotels, assisting UIP in that effort. Education and outreach. The Office of the Tenant Advocate's Education and Outreach Branch educates and informs the tenant community on tenant protections in the district. And due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to cancel all in-person meetings, and we were unable to host an in-person stakeholder meeting or our annual summit. Nonetheless, we were able to successfully transition our outreach efforts to online platforms. The OTA has also continued with virtually monthly Renters' Rights 101 sessions, stakeholder presentations on topics of interest to tenants, developments of new materials to educate the public, and providing TOPA technical advisory consultation. In FY21 and 22 to date, the OTA participated in 190 outreach events and educated 3,855 district attendees on their tenant rights and the services of the OTA. In 22, the branch will continue these activities as well as expand its services to include a tenant association peer mentorship program and ultimately expand that to a tenant association certification program. And we've provided you charts as well to show you the types of activities that we engaged in, and also a chart that showed you the participation by ward. The agency also continues to explore new outreach endeavors and partnerships. Since 2018, we have partnered with a community partnership to give presentations to inform the organization's cohort about the rights of district tenants and the responsibility of district landlords to those tenants. The agency has also enhanced its relationship with the Mayor's Office on Latino Affairs and the Mayor's Office on African Affairs, allowing us to partner together in disseminating information to the district's Latinx and African residents. The OTA appreciates the mayor's budget item and the council's generous appropriation of funds that created our Vanguard diversion program and provided additional FTEs to the educational and outreach branch. In order to broaden the agency's outreach efforts in a way that is different from the work done by the branch, a dedicated public relations FTE would expand the agency's ability to promote awareness of its resources for tenants in all parts of the city, maximize the use of social media and access to TV and radio for public service announcements and other purposes. And now, as I get close to the end, I will talk about the Rent Control Housing Clearinghouse database. I will now discuss this. As we have apprised the committee in recent monthly reports, there are several delay factors not within the OTA's control that have made on-time delivery of the database impossible. OTA, DHCD, and DCRA worked together for much of FY21 with the goal of executing an MOU by October 31st of 2021. That date was critical because it left just enough time for DCRA to deliver the application programming interface keys and for the vendor to adapt and incorporate them so that the database could be completed before the statutory deadline. To date, however, DCRA has not yet executed a contract with a vendor to complete the first steps in that process. DCRA also reserves the right to refuse data that the OTA has requested pursuant to the law, including data fields critical to meet the statutory requirements and purposes of the database. Unfortunately, we cannot estimate how much time it will take to resolve these matters. Additionally, due to the RHC's recent regulatory revisions, the rent administrator will have to revise certain rent control forms, which will require further time-consuming modifications to the database. Nonetheless, the agency is doing what it can to mitigate such delay factors through further preparatory work that we hope can help jumpstart the process once we move beyond the current impasse. So I get an F in my efforts related to the completion of the database. I have yet to fail in any project that the city council has asked of me in the 16 years that I've been here. And I am very remorseful to have to give this report today. But I would ask the committee to continue to stay with me. We have the contract with the vendor. If we lost this, then it would be almost a start all over again process. And I do believe that we should be able to get this impasse corrected. I have a cost figure that also tells me we need an additional $264,000, which I asked for in my last year's hearing. Because of this delay and with the forms having to be done, the vendor can't move fast. He can't go. We, more than anyone, understand the significance and importance of this system, what it will do for the city. I have reached out to other administrative people and no one has responded to me to date. I want to thank you, Chairman Bonds, and this committee for all of the support you have given to my agency. This concludes my testimony, and I am happy to answer any questions you and members of the committee now have of me. I can't hear you.
Okay, Ms. Reeves, I want to thank you for what I consider a very thorough review of the work, the important work that your agency has accomplished over the last, almost, I'll say 15 months. So thank you very, very much for that. And I'm sure that everyone who was listening is very excited with what your agency has been able to accomplish, and has faith that you will continue to be a jewel in our city. So thank you very, very much. I don't have too many questions because, as always, your testimony is usually pretty thorough, but there are a few areas that I want to deal with. And as you can tell, I'm slowly digesting the database,
Yes,
which
ma'am.
we have tried for so long to have. And I want to talk with you offline about it so that I understand all the particulars.
Okay.
And I think that's only fair, because we have year after year reported to the public that we have been moving, but slowly. And as I told staff the other day, I said, if this is an issue of information, if this is an issue of lack of cooperation, then maybe we need to exercise our subpoena power. And maybe we need to have a specific hearing to talk about what we are trying to accomplish, why it's important to the city, and who it is that's kind of not understanding the importance of the database, but more importantly, the importance of cooperation within our big, broad government. And so that's kind of like where I am, but I want to get your advice before I take that step forward. So I'll just leave it at that,
Okay.
if you don't mind for today.
I'm available whenever you request it.
All right, and we do definitely need to get together with you on that. Wanted to talk a little bit about the eviction diversion program that we thought we really were going to have a tremendous turnout. And I see that you have indicated that you still feel there may be some issues. And I wanted to talk candidly about where we are with this whole eviction situation. I'm very thrilled that you're now have good relations with the courts, and that is such a breath of fresh air and is helping us. But when I look at your chart, which pretty much, it speaks for itself, it's saying where we thought we were going to have thousands of eviction cases almost instantly, we are saying that there were only 207 cases actually executed. Executed means evictions, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Those were cases that, let me preface by saying that the chart is somewhat deceiving in the point that we didn't tell you that those were writs that had been activated prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
So all of the eviction activity that occurred from September pretty much through the end of the year were for cases that were quashed when the pandemic occurred. There were 609 writs that had been issued. Some of those got satisfied, over the 2-year period. And so we had the other 500 and some, there were 500 not executed, but 500 filings. But only
Right.
of those, a lot of that had been taken care of by state EC also.
Okay. All right. And so with that being the case, sounds like the courts are going to be delayed at least 6 months, possibly 8 months. And so does your office receive information that informs when the courts receive a eviction
Filing?
petition? Mhm.
The filing?
Yes.
Yes, we now have a memorandum of agreement with the office within the court that handles filings. And so every Monday, we will be receiving a spreadsheet from that office that tells us the filings for the upcoming weeks. We did that so that creating a diversion program could be a diversion program, meaning with attorneys on board that allows us a chance to get to the tenants and find out what the issues are. But coupled with that, as we indicated about the rental assistance, we're also estimating that you need another almost $100 million to handle what could be coming down the pike. If the money doesn't come, you will see more people evicted.
Mhm.
We
Okay,
don't
so-
know yet, but we will be creating a spreadsheet that deals with filing data to the extent that we can, because as I indicated,
Yeah.
it's confidential. We can't put names or anything. We can use numbers, so we will be able to see what's going on. That's why we petitioned the court to get this additional information. And as I'm talking to you, our first landlord and tenant case is being handled today in our conference area when we became a satellite office for the court.
All right. So in other words, I can look forward to getting from you on at least a couple of times a month, some indication of the new filings, the number
ma'am.
of new filings.
That
Okay.
is correct.
And that will help us, particularly as you well know, we're in the budget season coming up and want to
Exactly.
make sure that if we need to take care of this matter, that we can really take care of it. Okay.
But we did the research through Pulse, which is a part of the U.S. Census Bureau, to look at what potentially is coming down the pike. So the information that we provided you with in this testimony is pretty accurate as it relates to those that do that kind of research. So you're
Yes.
looking at a need for $100 million. And I know that there are tenant organizations, Tenant and others, who have been knocking on the doors of the council to talk about, using money out of the surplus. What I felt my responsibility was to give you factual data so that you would know what your estimated potential need might be and where that money might be coming from.
Yes.
Because certainly the 17 million was gone before it got here with
Yes.
those people who had filed. So I believe Laura's Department of Human Services, they already had that money spent before they had gotten it.
All right. Yes. Well, I appreciate that. And in my world of a real deal, I'm very interested in the filings as these new filings become available. I think they also are informative. And I say that because, the other day I was having a conversation with another government manager, director, and the issue was how do we have what basis do we make decisions for, let's say, persons at 0 to 30% income, and how many units do we have that are occupied by that population? And so we ended up speaking about 62,400 households that fall in that category.
Mhm.
Based on census data, using the same kinds of sources that you use, or the same sources, in fact. And so that's the primary concern that we have, coupled with those that are at 31% to 50%, which is many consider the working poor, those that we don't know are living paycheck to paycheck, but
Yes.
that is their reality. And so when you look at those numbers, we do not get to the numbers that are being proposed as needing rental assistance. But if we are, we want to make sure that we have the money set aside so that it can be used in that direction. So I'm a little confused as to what is coming down the pike. but I think it is a sizable number. I certainly agree with that, and want to make sure that if there's anything that we can do at our committee level, that we get it done.
Well, to the extent that we can perform more research in our policy branch, and I have to tell you that they are working real hard all the time. And we keep watching this number. The more that we can do research, when I heard Rob Liardo talk from Tenant about helping us with staff personnel, we could use a person that could deal with statistics and economic analysis, because I think we've reached a point where that is really a critical area of research that I believe my office should be responsible for to the city council. We should be able to give you data about the city in the most finite detail, so that you are as well equipped in your decision making as you possibly can be. That's just another area that, you know, I'm very, very keen on it. Hoping that my educational and outreach branch can eventually have a research component. So that's all that they do is look at housing data, and we are the source to go to for that within the city, because I believe that's part of what the Office of the Tenant Advocate's responsibilities are, in addition to those that were expounded on by the tenants today in their comments. I will say that the questions or the comments or recommendations that were provided by Rob and Tom, as well as Brian, we provide on a regular basis a piece that goes out to all of the tenants on our listserv, which grows all the time, about the hearings that are coming up. And we certainly can embellish that so that it can now go on the website. We are in the process of hiring our IT person finally. And so that we can make that leap to expand and to refresh our website so that it is more informative to the public as they would like it to see. What I will say is, though, positions on proposals are not things that I have been accustomed to providing. I'm more inclined to, when we had stakeholders meetings where people came, was listening to what the tenant community, what their desires were, what they felt, and to the extent incorporating that into the legislative recommendations that we've made to the committee. If we need to change that up a bit, I'm sure we can do it without it. I believe that I have to stand on an objective standpoint. I know I'm the advocate, but at the same time, I'm on two sides of the coin. I don't carry the signs in the street, but I have to be able to provide the committees with the appropriate amount of recommendations that I believe represent the needs of the tenant community. And we've done that in many, many different areas, I believe, over the years. And particularly in 21, we had a lot going on, as you saw, as I read all of that list of those bills that came before you. So it's not a defense. I'm always looking for constructive criticism and things that will help us to embellish and to improve upon what we do as a government agency in order to ensure the tenants' rights are being protected. I do want to say this, however. I want to make sure that it's very clear that being nominated by someone for a position does not intend to influence that individual's conviction. My conviction has been one for tenant rights from the time I took the job to the day to this very moment. And I think that if you talk to the housing provider community, they tell you I am the tenant tiger. I am the person who stands before them and will challenge them at any step when I feel that they are not doing the right thing. I've developed relationships on both sides of the house because it is important to be able to talk to those individuals that are managing housing. And I have been involved personally on many properties, inspecting them and working with tenant housing providers to ensure that tenants' rights are being protected. Call the guy who owns the properties on Kansas Avenue. He'll tell you I was there till the end while we took care of those tenants. So it should not be that because you are in a political position that you are compromised in doing the job that you've been asked to do.
Thank you very much for that point, and you did cover the questions that we received from the public earlier. Thank you very much. Ms. Shreves, I wanted to talk a little bit about your idea of doing fire drills in apartment buildings and ask that let's start with those that are considered naturally affordable, built after 1975 and up until, let's say, 1990, because I find at my office, many of the constituent complaints are from those
Properties.
buildings. Mhm. Yeah, they're
Well,
from those buildings.
I believe, well, you know what, I learned something this morning. The fire at 301 G Street, you know, this is a pretty tall complex. My nephew lives in that building. He was at my house yesterday and he left, he went home. And then I get an email from UIP this morning telling me about what had happened with the property and what was going on with the tenants. Part of the tenants they took to a sister property that they own, and the OTA put the rest of the people in hotels. When I talked to him this morning, he said that somebody banged on his door. This was last night. They banged on his door, and it probably was a neighbor, and he went back to sleep. And he lived on the 8th floor. The fire was on the 3rd floor. The whole 3rd floor was uninhabitable, okay? When I talked to Tamala this morning, my chief of staff, we were talking about this, and I said, when I asked Mike, I said, well, didn't you hear a fire alarm? She said, no, Ms. Shreve, the fire alarm won't go to that floor. Well, when we were doing it was OAG, OTA, we were at Rittenhouse. And the issue of fire maintenance and so forth came up. And one of the tenants indicated that there had been a bomb scare there and nobody left their units. Well, I began to get worried about this and saying that when you're that lax, now you could get caught up in the fire and die because you hadn't had to go down, walk down or whatever to go through the process of a fire drill. And I believe, when we were kids in school, everybody had fire drills. In commercial buildings, they always have fire drills. Why don't we have fire drills going on in these residential properties? Because I believe people's lives are at stake when they get too complacent. And when my nephew told me, he turned over and went back to sleep. And I'm saying to myself, the man could have been burned up in his unit if the fire had gone that far.
Oh, yeah.
So I really do believe we should talk to the department of the fire chief. And as I also said, I believe that there should be the kitty fire extinguisher should be a mandate in these apartments. Grease fires are one of the most common fires that happen. And people don't have a fire extinguisher where they could put it out and keep on moving. This is something that needs to happen. And I thought about it and I said, well, I know the next time we have a tenant summit, one of the things I will give away will be fire extinguishers because I believe people don't even think about it. My nephew, again, he was with me and we went to Home Depot. I gave him one for his unit at 835 301 G Street. So I just think that there are some things that people forget about. They don't think about. And we live in a world where you've got elderly people, disabled people, all these kinds of folks living in one building. And who knows that? How well does the property manager know the community that they manage? That's the question that I have. And I believe it's important that you know your community because we've lost the sense of community in many instances. And I believe we have to get back to it in order to ensure that all people are being protected at the same time. And certainly the property that Tom Gregory lives at, 4000 Mass, we know that there's a lot of elderly people that live there. Do they do fire drills? I don't know. They're a very active tenant association. So maybe they do. But I believe that it's something that we should be talking to the fire chief about to enact and to really think about. Because we've already spent 50% of our annual budget in the first quarter on fires.
Okay, please let me know how that goes. In fact, involve my office because we want to stay on top of this as we think about very strong motivation for how we use so-called surplus dollars.
Okay.
You know, we really, it ought to be used to really satisfy needs in the community,
Yes,
as
ma'am.
opposed to create something that, you know, might
Just
have,
because.
shoulda, what have,
Yes,
exactly.
ma'am.
Yes,
ma'am.
because I'm hearing more and more from the public of, you know, how are you really spending my money?
Yes,
That's what folks are saying, because, you know, it's the economy now. It's everything. Everyone's concerned about the high cost of living.
Yes.
And so we're looking at things a little differently, and rightfully so. I think the time has come for us to, yes, we celebrate that every year our budget is $1 billion more, but what do we really do with that $1 billion more? And how does it benefit the community so that everyone or the whole
Benefits, yes.
is part of the result? So that's where I am.
Okay.
I appreciate your testimony. Just one other area. You mentioned that this landlord, having the landlord to undergo a replacement reserve process, and perhaps there's a need for a study.
No, there's not a need. That's a part. The replacement reserve account is not set up until you have the study.
Okay.
The study takes every piece part of a unit, the lighting, the appliances, the common areas, everything in a unit is studied. And there are companies that's all they do. They come in, they tell you what your preventative maintenance costs should be based on monthly, sometimes weekly. And I'm telling you this because I did it when I worked for NCHP, the largest housing corporation at the time in the country. We set up a preventative maintenance program for every property. We already had replacement reserve accounts, but the replacement reserve account then is created based upon the needs that you have on a, let's say, a monthly, quarterly, annual basis, as well as a piece of that for all of the useful life things that an engineer will tell you the useful life of everything in your building. The warranties usually have that also, but it is incumbent upon property owners to have a replacement reserve account. You could eliminate the capital improvement petition altogether if you had that replacement reserve account. It is not the tenant's responsibility to pay for the owner's asset. And that's what we have going on right now. And as I talked about the fact of the implementation stuff, selective implementation. Yes, we provided the legal counsel for 4,000 Mass in that case that they had. And I don't believe the capital improvement has been implemented to date. So it's like a hammer hanging over these people's head that anytime it could drop. There should be a period, you either use it or you lose it. If the government approves it, obviously you didn't need it if you haven't taken. You see, that's the concern I have, that the government gives you the approval, but you don't then implement it. And the poor tenants, they're aging in place. Some of them are working, some of them aren't. And everybody's sitting there wondering when that $200 more is coming. And that affordability, we've seen people have to move because of it. So I think that the replacement reserve account is good business practice. I think if you look at larger corporations, they already have one. They want to know when, how much money do I need to put aside to replace all of the refrigerators? Or one of the things that I hear constantly, nobody paints their units. There's no law that says an owner has to paint the unit. So a person lives there 20 years and it's never been repainted. Like I know, just kitchen fumes alone are on that wall. People, the life of the property is the life of the people that live in the property. And they should be treated if you're going to ask for a rent increase, or the rent increase should be justifiable.
Correct.
You know, you don't get it unless you can prove to us that you need it. Just because the law says you can increase doesn't mean that you should. And so maybe the council needs to look at changing automatic rent increases. It shouldn't be an automatic adjustment every year.
I am there. I am definitely there, as you well know.
Yeah.
We've had many discussions, so.
Yeah. So, but I do believe
But
that
it's time to make it real.
take up, you know?
It's time to make it real.
Yeah.
You know, the pandemic has changed a lot of circumstances and situations, and it's time for the city to be modernized, so that, you know, all who are here have an opportunity to coexist.
Yes, in a quality facility. See, just because your stuff is working doesn't mean it's quality if it hasn't been updated and upgraded.
That's right.
And I think that that's the other part. Energy efficiency is more than just utilities. It's also the faucets. It's the toilet. It's the everything that you use is now at an energy level. And if you still have the same stove you had when you moved in and you've been there 30 years, you know it's not energy efficient.
Correct.
Because things have changed. And I think those are the things that matter to people who, you know, a person, do you live in a house or do you live in a home? I use that as the analogy. It's a house when it's a place where you just throw your stuff. It's a home when you feel comfortable when you sit down in that chair. And I think that's what everyone who stays in a place is looking for. And I also want to just say that the rent increase business needs to be looked at hard. We have gotten so many ATDs in the last 30, 45 days that they blow my mind. And the other part, and I just talked to Joel and Joy about this yesterday as we were finalizing my testimony, and this is about what's happening with the leases. What we see here is that most of these housing providers don't want tenants on a month to month. They want a guarantee that you're going to be there from year to year. And if you decide to be on a month to month, they penalize you by giving you a rent increase that is so exorbitant and out of proportion that you then say, well, I guess I better sign on a new lease. So we see constantly people talking, well, I didn't get a renewal for my lease. Well, the law currently doesn't require a renewal. It says that you perpetually can stay there as long as you meet the terms. And instead, the housing providers put a lot of them in these single family housing, and that's my last get on the soapbox about, is the thing about the basic business license for condos and single family housing has got to be improved. Because we've got plenty of young people living in these single family houses, and the landlord makes up the rules. The tenants don't read the lease. And then we get they call us, and that's fine, but it's a little bit after the case. And my philosophy, if you don't know the rules, you can't play the game. And most of them don't know the rules because they just sign their name. So joint and several liability is a big issue that we've been dealing with for the last decade.
Ms. Shreves, you have just made it very clear to me that much in the way the council agreed to a few provisions, including the various petitions for rent control units in the past, it is time for us to bring about some reform.
Yes, ma'am.
In this economy. So
yes.
I will be in touch with you about 5 different areas, including going back to one of my favorites, and that is the vacancy increase, which was originally proposed at 5% and 10%, and it didn't get there. So we'd like to come on a little more aggressively. Why? Because we've seen the economy and how the economy is working, or doesn't work. And so everyone is hurting now, and we all have to have a heart. We have to have a heart for each other. and know that no tenant is in a position to bear the burden of a $1,500 monthly increase in rent.
No.
That just is, it defies the term rent, quite honestly, in many of the housing developments that we have throughout the city. So we have to work on these things and immediately. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, I'm ready
All right.
whenever you are.
Most definitely. So
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony today. And I would imagine I have not been joined by anyone, so I thank you profusely. And we're going to now take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we'll hear from the Housing Finance Agency and their public and government witnesses. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, team. Thank you. Okay, team, are we ready to resume?
Yes, Councilmember, we are live streaming on YouTube. We are being recorded, and you can pick up where you left off.
All right, thank you so much. Well, welcome back, everyone. We took a brief recess, and now we are prepared to continue here at the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration with our oversight hearing of OTA, Office of Tenant Advocate, and now we are turning to the District of Columbia Housing Finance Agency. The Finance Agency was created in 1979 to stimulate and expand home ownership and rental housing opportunities for low and moderate income families in the district. The agency is independent and self-funded with no appropriations from the district. However, just want to mention that this is an opportunity every year during our budget cycle to hear more about how the agency is functioning. And to achieve their mission, the Housing Finance Agency issues taxable and tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds to lower the financing costs for home buyers and developers. The agency offers a variety of products to assist the residents in achieving their dream of becoming homeowners, including by co-administering the Home Purchase Assistance Program, HPAP, and operating the Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Tax Payment Program, REMIT. The Housing Finance Agency also plays a vital role in the multifamily housing arena by financing affordable rental housing through the multifamily mortgage revenue bonds, low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC is the acronym, and the McKinney Act loans. The agency is one of the district's most pivotal bodies in creating affordable housing. It has a significant role in meeting Mayor Bowser's goal of 12,000 new affordable housing units by 2025. At this time, we're going to hear first from, we have a public witness who wants to testify on the performance of the agency in FY21 and through FY22 to date. And so we'll now turn to Ms. Joanne Savage, who is the managing attorney at the Legal Counsel for the Elderly. Ms. Savage, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair Bonds. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I always appreciate and am struck by the council and staff's continuing tireless work, especially during oversight season. As you said, I'm Joanne Savage, manager of the Consumer Advocacy and Homeownership Preservation Practice at Legal Counsel for the Elderly. LCE provides free legal services for DC's lower income seniors, including those facing foreclosure, and we have a particular expertise in defending homeowners who are facing foreclosure on reverse mortgage loans. My testimony today will focus on the REMIT program administered by the Housing Finance Agency. LCE urges the committee to pass legislation to make the program permanent, incorporating lessons learned from the successful initial phase. REMIT is a targeted program that helps homeowners who are facing foreclosure by their reverse mortgage company, usually because they have missed a property tax, insurance, or condominium fee payment. Reverse mortgage foreclosures can take place over very small amounts. Once the missed payments reach just $2,000, the servicer is required by federal regulation to institute foreclosure proceedings. And the result is that we see homeowners in their 70s, 80s, and even in a few cases 90s facing foreclosures over amounts that are often in the range of just about $5,000. It doesn't sound like much, but as I'm sure everyone on this meeting today knows, a homeowner on a fixed income often simply cannot catch up once behind and ultimately faces foreclosure and displacement. As with so many housing matters, there is a disparate racial impact. A 2019 study by USA Today found that reverse mortgages end in foreclosure 6 times more often in predominantly Black neighborhoods than in predominantly white ones. REMIT serves a uniquely vulnerable set of homeowners who are often ineligible for other financial assistance programs. Older homeowners facing reverse mortgage foreclosure often fall behind for reasons that, while extraordinarily sympathetic, do not always fall within the parameters of federally funded assistance programs like Home Saver and potentially the new HALF program, which require the homeowner to demonstrate a financial hardship, that is, a change in income or expenses. Reverse mortgage borrowers may have a steady fixed income. They may not have a change in income, but may fall behind for other reasons. For example, because they experience a loss of capacity to handle their affairs, a medical emergency, or the loss of a spouse who handled the family budget. And one missed property tax payment or perhaps difficulty renewing home insurance can quickly spiral into a hole from which they cannot dig out on the fixed income. REMIT was specifically designed for these older homeowners, and it has been extraordinarily effective. For example, for the period from 2016 to 2019, only 3 of our reverse mortgage clients qualified for Home Saver assistance in its initial phase. And that was despite best efforts by HFA staff within the parameters of the federal regulations backing that program. By contrast, in the first 2.5 years of REMIT, 20 of our clients were helped. And REMIT, in those cases, that assistance is a lifeline that gives them a fresh start for longtime homeowners to securely age in place. Without REMIT, we had seen years of struggling to keep up with unaffordable payments, with the stress of a foreclosure and the repayment of the past amounts digging into their budget and really creating just an untenable situation that would last and last. The structure of the program also ensures that those borrowers, when they receive REMIT assistance, are connected with housing counseling and legal services to help address the root causes of the default. And we have seen a demand for the REMIT program slow during the pandemic, as the moratorium has protected borrowers from new foreclosure filings. So many borrowers are, falling into this situation, but may not currently be aware either that they are going to be served with foreclosure papers, or that the REMIT program might be here to help them once they are. So I'm here today to urge the district to make ready programs to meet the needs of homeowners once the moratorium lifts and the mortgage servicers begin sending those notices of foreclosure to borrowers. National data indicates there is a backlog building of reverse mortgage foreclosures. For example, the mortgage servicers recently estimated 30,000 loans in default, with half of those experiencing default after March 2020. Finally, from an oversight perspective, we applaud the Housing Finance Agency's administration of the REMIT program. In our experience, staff working on the program have been diligent about reviewing applications, understanding the human stories behind them, and they have granted assistance to the maximum extent allowed by the enabling legislation in our experience. As the council incorporates lessons learned from the initial phase, LFE has proposed a few targeted amendments that would further increase access to this vital assistance. And those include further streamlining the application process and eligibility criteria, ensuring that widowed spouses can access the program, and increasing the maximum assistance cap. The current $25,000 has been sufficient for most borrowers and probably will continue to be, but we do see unusual situations where a large buildup has happened before the foreclosure is filed. And that may be all the more case after the buildup of arrears during the pandemic. So with that, I am over time. I apologize. I thank you. I'm happy to answer questions. And we have been in contact with your staff. I greatly appreciate their work, and we're happy to continue working with them to try and make the program permanent going forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savage, for your testimony. As you were speaking, I was wondering about the foreclosure notice and how we could, I know that you hear from persons who are already in the foreclosure trap, so to speak, but is there something that begins the process, like a filing where somehow, let's say the housing finance agency could be notified and then therefore notify your office to begin working with the client?
It's an excellent question, and we're always sort of trying to work to reach people earlier in the process before they have that alarming foreclosure notice. We find it somewhat challenging with reverse mortgage borrowers to target them. We do monitor the court case filings at Superior Court closely, and because there are sort of some many of those cases are filed in the name of unique plaintiffs. We're able to sort of look at those dockets periodically and ensure that we are trying to reach out to folks. With the filing of a court case, the plaintiffs are required to provide the foreclosure hotline, the district's foreclosure hotline, as an insert with the service packet that they serve on the defendant borrower. And that foreclosure hotline, it's actually staffed by Housing Counseling Services, who was one of the key partners on the REMIT program. So when the lawsuit is filed, we are sort of able to get in contact with them. To reach them at an earlier point, I think would require the cooperation of the mortgage servicers. And it's an avenue we would love to explore. The servicers are sort of national entities. And so I think the challenge is to get them to provide district unique information. That said, I do think it's achievable, and there may be some room to work on that and see if they would cooperate with us in providing information at an earlier point. Of course, the sooner the problem is engaged, the less costly to solve it as well. The borrower owes less because as it goes on, the servicer begins advancing more and more payments over time, and the whole is deepened.
Okay, I was just really curious as to how we can usurp this process in as early as possible so that we could assist the families. As you say, they tend to be older households that we are assisting, and let's try to work on that. It just, yes, I hear the servers, but in order for the servers to do their work, there is some entity that knows. Right. And if it's not the court, what entity is it?
It's a great question. I like the thinking, and I'm happy to brainstorm further. Further with your staff to try and get those the lenders themselves, as they first see it, as they provide the initial notices that you're falling apart, falling behind, to see if they could be persuaded to enclose some district-specific information. And I mean, I know that the program is helpful to the lenders as well, who I think in many cases would rather see the borrowers receive assistance to continue to live in the home than to be in the position of foreclosing on someone in their 70s and 80s. So I would hopeful that perhaps if we reach out to them, we could get some cooperation on that. And I'm happy to work with you and your staff on that.
So I'm making the assumption that the reverse mortgage companies do not necessarily need a license to operate in DC, but if that was a requirement, and then they were required to provide us with a copy of all of the notices that they file, we might have an opportunity to get on top of this faster. You know how I feel about the senior population in the city, and I am here to defend them, every step of the way. And so I want to make sure that anyone who has lived here long-term, 20 years or longer, is long-term, quite honestly, in America today, that they have the option to continue to live in this community. And I don't want them run out. And this is a good way for them to lose their home, to lose their property, to lose their asset. So they have no determination for their future. So yes, let's work together and see what we can do about this. I'm prepared to do any law that makes sense, any law that's reasonable. so that we can take care of that. And including streamlining the amendment you mentioned to streamline so that widows can move quickly, especially if the spouse expired spouse is the name on the document. Yes, let's see if we can do that. And you're saying you want to increase it to 25,000?
It's currently 25,000, and we would suggest increasing it to 50,000. And I don't think you will routinely see loans that go over that amount. I think most actually have been far below that, substantially below that amount. But you do, in some cases, you may have an instance where the mortgage company suddenly pays a condo arrearage that bumps up the amount that had been previously sort of sitting. Often it's the mortgage company being somewhat slow to act, or there's some unusual factor that caused the deficiency to be somewhat greater. And ultimately, those homeowners, if you for the purpose of the program, they're still squarely within those that you would want to help. So by putting it above, I don't think that you will see a large number of those higher grants, but it will allow you to help the homeowners who have some sort of by no fault of their own found themselves in that unique situation. And partly that's a reflection of the high cost of housing in the district, as these arrearages can escalate rapidly.
Okay, we'll look at your recommendation and see what we can. We'll talk to the agency next, and I'm sure they'll have some comments on what you're proposing. But thank you very much for your testimony today, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, and thank you
much.
as well, Chair Bonds.
We will now hear from our government witnesses. This agency is represented by the Executive Director, Christopher Donnell. Mr. Donnell, if you would raise your right hand, and any of your other team members that may testify with you, we will administer the oath and we'll get going here. Okay. Do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements that you make before us today to be truthful and complete?
Yes.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Mr. Donnell, you can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Christopher Donnell, Executive Director and CEO of the District of Columbia Housing Finance Agency. On behalf of our board of directors and our staff, thank you for the opportunity once again to appear before you for this year's performance oversight hearing. Allow me a moment now to introduce the staff who are sitting at the table with me. Directly across from me is Mr. Ike Imo. He's the head or the senior vice president of our multifamily lending and neighborhood investment group. Directly next to him is Steve Clinton, our CFO. And directly next to me, and I'm excited to introduce her, is our new Senior Vice President of Single Family, Miss Wendy Redfern. And we are ecstatic to have her. She's come to us from Baltimore, and we really know that she's going to add a lot to our single family program. I also want to take a moment to recognize and commend my staff. The staff at the agency have worked tirelessly and creatively to serve the residents of the District of Columbia over the last several years. Our work and our contribution could not happen without each of them. Thank you to the DCHFA team. DCHFA is responsible for doing three things. First, DCHFA issues home mortgages through its lender partners and provides other tools to promote and preserve home ownership for residents of the district. Second, the agency issues tax-exempt bonds to fund the acquisition, construction, and preservation of multifamily housing, more commonly known as apartment buildings. And finally, over the last 5 years, the agency has made a direct investment into building for-sale housing for the missing middle income. The agency is also an instrumentality, which is a quasi-public, quasi-private institution. The agency does not receive any funding from the district. We are one of 3 agencies that function in service of the Mayor Bowser's housing goals. Our work could not be completed without our partnership with the Department of Housing and Community Development under the leadership of Director Drew Hubbard, the DC Housing Authority under the leadership of Executive Director Brenda Donald, and the Office of Planning under the leadership of Director Anita Kozart. Each of these agencies coalesces into the mayor's housing ecosystem led by the Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning and Economic Development, managed by Deputy Mayor John Falchicchio. DCHFA is an active housing partner and contributor to Mayor Bowser's housing goal of creating 12,000 units of affordable housing, but more specifically, the broader target of creating 36,000 units by 2025. Mayor Bowser's now $400 million commitment to the Housing Production Trust Fund further established the district as a national leader on investing in affordable housing. And I am proud of the agency's role in this critical and coordinated effort. Fiscal year 2021 marked DCHFA's 42nd year of serving the housing needs of the residents of the District of Columbia. Over the past 2 years, the agency has carried out its mission to advance the District of Columbia's housing priorities by investing in affordable housing and neighborhood development. Throughout this period and up until now, DCHFA continues to provide financial assistance to homeowners, renters, and housing providers impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic at a time when a place to call home is more important than ever. Through the administration of the Housing Stabilization Grants in December 2020, the ongoing efforts of the DC MAP program, the Mortgage Assistance Program, COVID-19, and the reopening and closeout of the Home Saver Foreclosure Prevention Program, DCHFA has made both rental and mortgage assistance available to the residents of the District of Columbia, as well as owners of affordable housing developments during these unprecedented times. DCHFA's Single Family Programs Division manages the agency's home ownership programs with the mandate of expanding and retaining home ownership opportunities in the district, primarily through the DC Open Doors mortgage loan programs, DC for Me, and as a co-administrator of the Home Purchase Assistance Program. Additionally, in FY21, the Single Family Division managed the Home Saver Foreclosure Prevention Program, as well as the Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Tax Payment Program, also known as REMAP. Through the agency's Multifamily Lending and Neighborhood Investment Division, DCHFA issues tax-exempt mortgage revenue bonds and administers the 4% low-income housing tax credit program to lower the cost of acquiring, constructing, and rehabilitating affordable rental housing. Every nominal dollar that the agency saves can go back into the Housing Production Trust Fund to fund more housing. Through our housing investment platform, HIP, the agency continues to deliver essential workforce homeownership units, expand the access to capital for small CBE developers, and contribute to the mayor's goal of retaining workforce residents and creating new homeowners. Today, I am pleased to report on the progress that the agency has made since its performance oversight hearing last year. In FY 2021 through the first quarter of FY 2022, DCHFA financed 1,530 units of affordable multifamily rental housing through the issuance of almost $424 million in tax-exempt bonds. There are a total of 14 projects in DCHFA's development pipeline for FY 2022. Over the course of this year's committee's review period, DCHFA's single-family programs performance has been stellar. During FY 2021, single-family programs in total produced $130 million in home loans in either first or down payment assistance programs. During the agency's last performance oversight hearing, I shared our plan to reopen the Home Saver Foreclosure Program, Home Saver Foreclosure Prevention Program, to offer district homeowners economically impacted by the coronavirus pandemic another resource to save their homes. I am pleased to report that the program was reopened in February of 2021, with approximately $4 million remaining in the program's funds available to DC homeowners. As a result of the Home Saver program being an additional resource, 50 DC residents saved their homes from foreclosure, the agency distributed another $1.1 million in funds. Thanks to your leadership, Chairwoman Bonds, and the committee, in March of 2019, DCHFA launched the Reverse Mortgage Foreclosure Prevention Pilot Program, which is known as REMIT. REMIT provided financial assistance for the payment of overdue property taxes and property insurance bills for those homeowners who are at risk of foreclosure. The financial assistance was made to qualified homeowners in the form of a zero-interest, non-recourse loan with a maximum assistance amount of $25,000 for each homeowner. The REMIT program served district homeowners 62 years of age or older. Applicants were required to have incomes less than 80% of area median income and be delinquent on their real estate taxes and property insurance, putting them at risk of foreclosure. In FY 2021, 6 seniors were able to save their homes through the assistance of the REMIT program. All of the applicants were African-American and resided in 3 of the 8 wards. The average income of these applicants was approximately $30,706, with 3 awardees above the age of 70 and the remaining above the age of 80. DCHFA distributed $58,180 in REMIT funds, with the average award amount being $9,600. Less than $10,000 allowed these seniors to remain in their homes, preserving home ownership, a lifetime of memories, and family legacy. I would like to thank the members of the council for allocating this funding for the REMIT program and entrusting the agency with the development and administration of this foreclosure prevention resource. DC Open Doors is the flagship program of DCHFA's home buying resources. There's a first trust mortgage loan program, which also has the option of down payment assistance to achieve 100% financing. In FY 2021 through FY 2022 to date, DC Open Doors has produced over $143 million in first trust and down payment assistance loans. Applicants who wish to become homeowners came from all 8 wards of the district, and DC Open Doors was able to assist them in purchasing homes across all 8 wards as well. Wards 7 and 8 are the leaders in the number of applicants and the number of approved home buyers. DC Open Doors home buyers are ethnically diverse, but they are also primarily African American. For the 4th year, DCHFA continues to serve as co-administrator of DHCD's Home Purchase Assistance Program. In FY 2021 through FY 2022 to date, the agency has administered over 200 loans and over $12 million in closing costs and down payment assistance dollars. During the reporting timeframe, the agency issued 435 notice of eligibilities to applicants. The highest number of NOEs received and issued are for residents in wards 7 and 8. DCHFA Innovates is more than a tagline and a hashtag often used by the agency. It is an attribute we embody. One of the most recent innovations is DC for Me. The program was launched in FY 2019 to incentivize more district government employees to become district homeowners. Through DC for Me, we are providing an additional resource that allows more people who are serving the district to also make it their home. DC for Me targets full-time government employees, including those working for independent agencies seeking to purchase their first home here in the district, but who do not qualify for the District of Columbia Employer Assisted Housing Program. DC for Me may be combined with DCHFA's other homeownership programs, allowing the buyer to have a suite of resources to choose from and apply to during their homeownership journey. As the gap between working incomes and home prices in the district continues to rise, the agency is grateful for the opportunity to fulfill its mission through the administration of wealth and legacy building homeownership programs. DCHFA is in its 4th year of being the district's only HUD Level 1 50/50 risk share lender. This program is unique because it allows the state housing finance agencies to access more efficient capital that lowers the cost of borrowing, which minimizes the amount of subsidy required for a transaction. In FY 2021, the agency issued $88 million in bond financing for 2 communities that utilized the risk share program: Hill East and 1530 First Street Apartments, both located in Ward 6. This year, for the first time ever, the agency, through its risk share program, was able to return $2 million to the Housing Production Trust Fund. Again, the agency was able to return $2 million to the Housing Production Trust Fund. It is the agency's goal to continue this type of efficient execution. DCHFA established the Housing Investment Platform, HIP, for innovative investments that will increase the agency's support of the District of Columbia's housing market outside of traditional bond and tax credit financing. HIP's Single Family Investment Fund provides joint venture capital to emerging developers for the creation of for-sale workforce housing in the district. The program's goal is to foster neighborhood stabilization, increase the tax base, and support projects that create employment opportunities through the construction of new homes. The investment from HIP significantly reduces the amount of capital the home builder needs to contribute to the project. In return, the home builder agrees to restrict sales to households making workforce incomes up to 120% of Washington, D.C.'s median family income. I am pleased to share with you today that both HIP developments discussed in my testimony before the committee last year have delivered. In September of 2021, we cut the ribbon at the Douglas, a Todd A. Lee townhome community named in honor of DCHFA's former executive director and CEO. The new development is located on West Street in Anacostia. At the ribbon cutting, we celebrated 8 DC residents moving into their first homes as owners. The Douglas's residents also included a single mother of 2 daughters, who's also a sergeant in the Metropolitan Police Department. The second HIP site delivered is the Corver Condominiums in Rosedale. Phase 1 has delivered and all units have been purchased by first-time home buyers. The second phase of the Corver condos is under construction. Both the Douglas and Corver projects are part of Mayor Bowser's Vacant to Vibrant initiative, completed in partnership with DHCD. HIP's pipeline has grown to 100 units and includes 33 units at the Heights in Marshall Heights. Annually, when we come before the council, we focus on the production of new units and assisting new homeowners. This year, our focus has been on the stabilization of our neighborhoods and the people we serve. As shared previously, in December 2020, the agency was able to assist approximately 12,000 residents and expend almost $10 million in housing stabilization grants. The program was available to properties that were financed using Housing Production Trust Fund, CDBG, home, or other city subsidies. This was a universe of almost 30,000 units. In FY 2021, the agency also provided bridge financing to help support over 40 residents of the Talbot Street condominiums during an emergency relocation. With every transaction closing and homeownership program application that is approved, the staff and I are aware that we are creating affordable, beautiful, and healthy housing across all 8 wards for our friends, our families, and our neighbors to continue to live and thrive in the city that we all love. The mayor's goal of creating 36,000 units by 2025 is absolutely achievable. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify, for the support that you have provided to the DC Housing Finance Agency. This concludes my testimony. I welcome your questions at this time.
Thank you very much for that glowing testimony. Some say it's easy when you do tax exempt bonds, but I think today you pointed out there's a little more to it than that. But let's get right into it. But thank you to you and your staff for the outstanding work, particularly during the pandemic. I know it wasn't easy. You were not all in the office every minute looking at figures and tablets and what have you in order to do your work. You found it somewhat challenging in the way in which all of us have had to work over the course of the pandemic. And let's hope that, B2 will escape us. I don't know that it will, because they say it's coming on fast. So let's just keep working to make the reality in the city that we all desire, and that is to get as many people as possible in ownership opportunities. So I thank you so much for that. We really, really are doing a good job. However, I want to talk about a few things. One, can you describe how the single family program works to produce $130 million in home loans in the first or down payment assistance programs?
Sure, Steve.
So we have a suite. Good afternoon. This is Steve Clinton, the CFO.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for your question. It was a fantastic year for the single family business. It was a big year in the mortgage business in general, but a particularly good year in DC. So we have a variety of products that we offer, first and second, as well as the HPAP program. We market through our website. We market through our lenders. We have a network of lenders in the DC community that we inform them of our product and the availability of money, and they're our primary source to bring the borrowers to us. So it's marketing, it's networking, and it's leveraging all the tools we have at our disposal to get as many people into as many homes in DC. And it was a monster year for us last year, and we're all thrilled about it.
Okay, thank you for that. And through the single family program, how many families did we put in homes total with HPAP, foreclosure prevention, remit? I mean, how many households did we really touch?
So if we, the DC open doors, it's in the neighborhood of 250. In the HPAP, it's another 150 or 160. In the remit, another 10 to 20. So, adding that all up, that's over 500, I would guess. And that's just households. So that's many more people than that.
Okay. All right. Wanted to ask a little bit about HPAP. I was the council member that increased the payout up to 80,000. And I wondered if we aren't ready to increase it again to maybe 130,000, given the high cost of ownership in the city. What do you think?
So Steve, let me jump in here. Madam Chairwoman, I think we're going to rely on you and your insight as a legislator to come back to us and tell us what's available, and we will deploy those resources. I will tell you that on average, we're seeing a maximum of about $60,000 to $70,000, but that's an average number. So we know that the cost of homes are increasing rapidly, and we know that there's a lot to think about. But we're here to serve and to deploy whatever capital that you provide us with out to residents in the District of Columbia to become homeowners.
And Mr. Donald, I do understand that. What I'm trying to do today, and I'm not trying to get into any budget marks, because as you know, you don't go through that process that the agencies do under the administration or under the mayor. But what I'm really trying to look at this issue from a realistic perspective. Thank you for indicating that the average is 60, 70,000, and that is the outlay. I guess that kind of informs to some degree. I'm trying to get to how do we help people who have a good rent paying record, as an example, but are at the low end of opportunity for ownership, how do we get them into homes? And it just seems like it's going to take more financial assistance than less. And so I don't know whether we double that number. Do we double 80 to 160, or because of the high cost of ownership in the city, or is there some other way to go about this?
So Councilmember, you and I have very long conversations in the evening about how we solve this together and come up with creative solutions. I do want to go back for a moment to simply evoke the name of one of my other colleagues, Director Drew Hubbard. He and his team are oftentimes thinking about the policy and the parameters for HPEP. So I truly want to defer to him, and we work in partnership with him and his team to figure out what's necessary. To come back to your more immediate question, part of what I would say is that's a challenging thing to do. And so, there are a number of different factors. We want to make sure that the homeowners we put into homes are sustainable. And we understand that at very low income levels, there are, the sustainability of consistent employment is one of the challenges, right? The level of income is one of the challenges. And so we don't have a solution, but what we are willing to do, and I say this to you frequently, is we're willing to sit down with you and think about creative ways. We're willing to look at best practices, but we don't have that magic bullet here at the agency, unfortunately. What I will also say to you, though, is we now have a new master servicer. And what that means is that's the person who monitors our loans, they collect the payments, they give them back to us to pay back our bondholders. They're giving us a lot of information about the borrowers who work with us. And we are really going to spend some time digging into that information and understanding better who's borrowing from us, how, and potentially why. And so I think over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be able to talk a lot more intelligently about what's happening on that side of the business. And I think that will be really helpful as you want to explore new opportunities.
It will be very helpful, and it's been some time coming. When I look at the date of creation of your agency, it's been a while, and that seems to me as something that the agency has to not only get on top of, but has to understand that this is the world that we're operating in now, and so we will need to look at that kind of data. Quite honestly, I had hoped today that I would learn a little bit about how we can get consistent bill payers, households, and into a better living environment. And I'm looking to your agency to assist in that process. But let me not go on about that. Let me ask you another question as it relates to the properties that you indicate. I think it's 1,530 units of affordable multifamily rental housing through the issuance of almost $424 million in tax exempt bonds. I want to ask you, do you have information broken down in some sort of chart format that could inform me of how many of those units are at 0 to 30%? How many are at 30 to, let's say, 50%?
We can certainly get you that information.
Okay. All right. Can I get that information within the next 10 days, please?
I have it right here. So
okay.
We'll look at it, make sure that everything is tight, and we'll send it to you shortly.
All righty. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. Then I wanted to just ask about your Home Saver program, where you have been able to provide, with the $4 million, you provided 50 residents with the saving of their home, and you distributed from the 4 million. My interpretation is the 1 million, 1.1 million. So you have 3 million remaining, right? Is that correct?
No, ma'am. That program was winding down previously. And so the Treasury Department has wound that all the way down. That program is no longer in existence.
So when the Department of Treasury winds it down, does that mean you give the money that's not spent back?
That is absolutely correct.
I was hoping you had a better answer for that.
I wish I had one for you as well.
All right, okay, all right, I'm looking for loose ends. I'm looking for money that we can pump into the community if at all possible. Let's see. Oh, as we talk about DC for me, and then the EAHP and the HPAP, because you say that in some instances, all of this can be combined, these home ownership programs, in order for a household to actually buy a property, correct?
Yes, there is a tapestry that gets woven together.
Okay, now is the, tell me a little bit about what would be the outcomes for a family that was able to tap all three? Would there be any payments that they must make to the government in the course of this process? Are these all grants? Please, I want the public to understand how they can use these programs.
Sure. So let me start by saying that our partners over at the Urban League administer the EHAP program, which is the program for district employees. So we don't do that here internal, right? So we can't talk about the details and the technical specifics about that. What we can tell you is if we have employees who are district residents or who want to become district residents and they exceed some of those income levels, in the DC for Me program can work for them. And Steve, you want to talk a little bit about the limits there?
So on our DC Open Doors program, we have our own internal down payment assistance program, which is up to 3% of the loan amount to either closing costs or down payment on a conventional loan, and up to 3.5% on the FHA loans. And then in addition, you have the HPAP loan, which we've mentioned. So those typically are separate programs. Occasionally a borrower can utilize both of those, but typically those are used separately.
Okay, so am I to understand that a family might take advantage of the DC for Me, and let's say they are getting resources at 3%. Then they might take advantage of the HPAP, where if they stay in the unit, they end up not paying any of the assistance back. And then if they take advantage of the employee assistance, same thing. So in other words, they may end up with a tranche of money, let's say as much as close to 100,000, maybe more, that they are really concerned with the 3% interest on whatever the DC for Me amount. Is that kind of what happens, or?
Mostly correct, but just a few clarifications. On the DC for Me program, the down payment assistance program, the DC HFA funds, you can borrow up to 3% of the loan amount for down payment assistance or closing costs. The interest rate is 0, but it is a repayable loan. So it's a 0% interest, no payments. But if you sell the house 5 years from now, you do owe that money back.
All right, thank you. I know that you have fact sheets for each of the programs that you operate. Can you make sure that our office gets a set of, up-to-date documents? I think that would be very helpful. We would like to assist in getting it out to the public. There is some confusion, not knowing what what they qualify for and where to go and how to get this going. And now it's wonderful to know that you can combine the programs in order to hopefully get your home. So appreciate that.
And council member, you should also understand, we mentioned earlier our lending partners. Our lending partners really work with their clients to figure out how to bring all those different resources together and to figure out what's right for each household, right? So as we sit here, we can talk more broadly about it, but if you really want to get into the weeds and understand what each individual homeowner can do or some really clear examples, then let us go back and get some of those from our lenders and we can share those with.
Well, that would be very helpful. One of the things that I'm trying very hard to do is to bring a little more transparency to our bank. And you're our bank for all practical purposes. And while I know in your heart you're a banker, you are, you deal with the dollars and cents all the time. It is very important that we translate that information so that the average person can understand. Every year I give accolades to your agency because you continue to grow and take care of yourselves and have, wonderful, expenditures in the right buckets perhaps. But why am I doing that if the public doesn't know that these are programs that are for them? And I want them to understand that this is being done. I mean, when you talk about 1,500 units and the backing of $424 million, that's a big deal. And so I want people to know that more can be done with the resources, but they have to reach out, not to you. I understand starts with the lenders and then it gets to you and what have you. But I really want them to know what the government is doing in this area, because home ownership is where the action is for many families that have been in the neighborhoods renting, and their aspiration is to own. And so how does your local government help you become a homeowner? That's my bottom line. And that's what housing affordability is about. I know we always talk about affordable housing, but we're really speaking of housing affordability. And how do we get there? The district is very similar to New York City, where 60% of our residents are renters. But we aspire to be like some of the other cities where 80% of the residents are homeowners. And we see that as a model that will sustain the District of Columbia. Renters can up and leave whenever they want to, and we're stuck with a stockpile of units. But if you're a homeowner, you think a little differently usually. You put your roots down, and we want people to put their roots down in the District of Columbia. Not just pass through the District of Columbia, but to live here. And so improving the quality of life, improving housing is at the top of the list, that and public safety, of course, and education. So that's my swan song for today and where I'm coming from. I did want to ask a little bit about if you use, I was listening to your testimony about the remit fund, and I wondered if there is a mathematical formula that could inform us as to who might be at risk. Maybe, something that would tell us the age of the household, the unit itself, whether or not there have been multiple problems with paying their mortgage insurance or something like that. I mean, is there some way we can get on top of this? I know we don't have the ability or the authority to invade every 62 years of age and older homeowners' files, but how can we put a hold on this where households are leaving the city in droves because big business is happy to buy your house for 50,000 or maybe even 100,000 more than you could get on the open market, and you think you've got a nest egg with that, knowing that it only lasts a year or two. In reality, I'm trying to stop this erosion of people, seniors being in trouble with their housing finance issues and then giving up and saying yes to big business that wants to buy half the block so that they can put in new housing that will be for new people, quite honestly.
I think that that's a great question, and we can go back and give it some thought and come back to you.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. I was trying to get your entire table engaged, Mr. Donald. So, okay. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, you mentioned the HUD's level 1 or the 50-50 risk share lender. Can you tell me what was significant about Hill East and the 1530 First Street apartments, both located in Ward 6, that gave them the ability to be considered the 50-50 risk share program?
Sure. I'm going to talk about the program globally and then turn over to my colleague, Ike Imu, to tell you some of the details about both of the transactions. But what I'll say is that program, the HUD 50-50 risk share program, is really about insurance. And essentially what we're saying to the market is we will pay back 50% of the loss, and HUD will pay back the other 50% of the loss. So if we lend $10 million, a loan goes bad, we lose $1 million, then the agency pays $500,000 and HUD pays the other $500,000. So it's really an evaluation of the credit worthiness of the borrower, the strength of the real estate, and the strength of the operator, right? So it's not simply just making that loan. There are a number of factors that go into evaluating it. And so I say that because I want to say this execution isn't right for everybody. And when the agency is taking on that type of risk, it's important that we really husband our resources and make sure that nothing goes wrong so that we continue to do the other good things that we just talked about. Ike, you want to talk a little bit about 1530 and Hill East?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Councilwoman. I think for Hill East in particular, that project had an LRSP contract that runs the life of our loan term. That, in addition to the programmatic elements of the site, the sponsor made us feel very comfortable extending our program to that particular project. I think globally, to what E.D. Donald has just said, we look at a combination of factors in deciding who we're going to partner up with on a project and who we're going to loan funds to. It's not fit for every project, but our intent is to have every project that comes through at least be considered for lower costs of capital. 1530, well-known sponsor, TM Associates, we really liked the location. We liked the idea of creating more affordable housing in that submarket. Within that submarket, existing affordable homes had been built in the 80s. there wasn't much new product. It's by the waterfront, it's out by the stadiums. Those things give us comfort in extending the loan product to that transaction.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to talk with you more about that. You can rest assured. Now, when you say the local rent supplement lifetime was contracted for lifetime, what does lifetime mean to you? Is this 40 years, 30 years until it's torn down, or what?
In this instance, we had a 17-year term loan with a 40 years of amortization.
I'm
The
sorry, you
LRS
said 17 years?
Yes, term on the loan we put up for that project on Hill East. The LRSP on that project would run for that 17-year period.
Oh, I see. Okie dokie. Thank you for that. And what about the housing that you said was built in the 1980s? Was there anything other than, as you said, location and the fact that it was built in the 80s? Were there any subsidized units in that project?
To clarify, in the submarket, most of the existing stock of affordable housing was built in the 1980s. So this new project, 1530, was a net new unit project in that submarket. Primarily, we liked both the location and the sponsor doing the project. It made us feel comfortable that if a project were to be non-performative from a loan perspective, the sponsor had the wherewithal and proven track record to step in and perform on behalf of the project. Additionally, the project was 100% affordable.
Okay, and who is the sponsor, please?
This project was sponsored by TM Associates.
TM?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I wanted to check on that, and now I'll get to more good questions. In your testimony, you stated that in FY21 through the first quarter of 22, that you have financed these 1530 units of affordable multi-family rental housing through the issuance of the 424 million taxes and bonds. Okay, and we've established that. And there is a total of 14 projects in the pipeline for, I guess, the remainder of FY22. At what level of affordability are these units considered affordable? Does it go to 120% of family median income?
All of the units in the pipeline, I believe, are all financed by Housing Production Trust Fund money. And so they will comply with the Housing Production Trust Fund requirements of 50 to 30. Okay,
thank you. And how long will these units be held at those levels? Is it according to the trust fund again?
Yes.
Which is 40 years?
So it's according to the trust fund requirements.
Okay. Not like what we agreed to with Hill East, 17 years. Okay.
So wait a minute, Councilwoman. So there's two separate issues, right? There's something about the duration of the affordability, and then there's something about the payment contract. So the payment contract was 17 years. There's the land use regulatory agreement stretches out for the term or the requirement of the Housing Production Trust Fund. So that's 40 years, it goes 40 years. Those two things are very.
Okay, so you're saying for Hill East, I'm backtracking now. For Hill East, the contract, the loan contract, you're saying is 17 years, correct? I think
the subsidy contract, the LRSP contract, the subsidy has a contract for 17 years. So that runs along with the term of the loan. There's another requirement about the duration of the affordability, right? And I don't know, do you remember exactly how long that is? We can confirm that. We don't have that.
But it's usually two rounds up to 30 years.
Okay, so let us confirm the actual duration. Council member, we weren't prepared to share that with you as it wasn't one of the questions. So we'll come back with the exact details. Just suffice it to say that there are two different levels. One is the subsidy to make the affordability happen, right? And then one is the restrictions on the project long-term.
I hear you, and I really would like to get from you all of the projects that we have that you have put financing to in FY21. We'll look at that first. And in the pipeline, current pipeline of FY22, I want to know the life of the loan and the life of the local rent supplement contract, I guess is what you would call it or have. And then the land contract. I really want to understand that because people get very mixed up in trying to understand what we are supporting in the community and how the tax dollars are working. So if I could get that in 10 days, please.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you so much. And can you just talk a little bit about HIPS, the Single Family Investment Fund that does joint venture capital in order to create for sale workforce housing?
Yes, ma'am. So we created, from the resources that we have, a $5 million investment fund. And the purpose of that fund was to help emerging developers actually build more middle income housing to retain families and individuals who had lived here for a very long time, but were being priced out of the district. So district employees, right, that police officer that we mentioned, can actually find a place, afford to buy it, and stay in the district. The way that that works is if we're building a house, and let's say that house costs $100, we can get a loan for $80, and then we have to put $20 in the deal. And instead of that emerging developer having to put that whole $20 in the deal, we'll put in $16 or 80%, right? He'll put in $4 or 20%. Once that house is sold and the money comes back, we'll both get our money back plus a return. When we get that level of return that we agree on, let's say it's 5%, then those returns flip to that developer, which means that developer has put in less money, right? But they're gaining more money on the back end. And you say, well, why would you do that, Mr. Donald? Here's why it's important. That same developer could go and build a house somewhere else in the city and make a lot more money. But what he has agreed to is, I'm going to cap the price of these homes up to 120% of AMI. And in exchange for that, right, you're going to make it feel like I'm still developing homes in the marketplace. And so we're willing to do that because it's for our mission. We want to produce that middle income housing, but we're also building the capacity of these emerging developers, right? So folk who may not always have access to capital to build these homes, so that they build up their capacity, they can do more, right? And we're growing people who traditionally can't access that money.
Okay, so when does the developer get their high return? At what point in the deal?
So if there's an 80-20 split and it's a 5% hurdle, right? Meaning that's your target return, then we get our 80% back at 5% and they get their 80% or 20% back at 5%. Then what happens is they start to get 80% after that and we get 20% in exchange for that affordability.
Okay, when does the change occur? At what year?
I'm sorry. This is when the house is sold. That's when everything happens. So when the house is sold, I'm sorry. Yes, when the house is sold.
Okay, so okay, let me see if I understand. Okay. So when the house is sold, that's when the developer begins to get 80%
No,
of the cost of selling the house?
no. So here's what happens. That
Okay.
$20 that we invested before, right? We put in 16, the developer put in 4. Both of us are going to get our money back first, right? Then once we get our money back plus 5%, then whatever else is left, let's say there's another $5 left from the sales of the profit, right? They would get $4, right? And we would get $1. That's after everybody got their money back with that initial return that we agreed upon.
Okay, I understand now. I didn't realize it was applicable, the 5%. Okay, so I got it now. Thank you very much for that equation. Oh my, it's after 3. Okay. Okay, want to ask you a little bit about the workings of the agency, particularly zeroing in on an article in December 21 in the Washington City paper, DCHA frozen rents, and it went on to say, I'm assuming you're familiar with the article. It talked about how there were some increases while rents froze through legislation, that some developers were able to get rent increases.
So we did read the article, but we did, the housing authority is responsible for reviewing those requests and approving those.
The housing authority approves the rent increases because of the.
So I believe that was an LRSP contract.
Okay, it's an okay, that it was, yes. I think we have pretty much covered almost everything from your testimony and from the information you provided us. Information that we could discuss regarding how your agency supports itself. We can, have a conversation later about that, Mr. Donald, but so I can say thank you all very, very much for providing the answers today, and thank you for being a part of today's hearing. I appreciate it very, very much. And to the public, that concludes today's performance oversight hearing for OTA and the Housing Finance Agency. And I want to thank everyone who participated. I think we learned a great deal, and hope those who watched have a better understanding of the work of these agencies, especially during the past year. If the public has any additional thoughts or would like to submit written testimony regarding the performance of these agencies, the hearing record will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1, 2022. The next meeting of the committee will be on Friday, February 25th, when we will hold a performance oversight hearing for the Office of Senior Advisor, the Office of City Administrator, the Executive Office of the Mayor, and the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel. With that said, the time is now 3:25 p.m. and today's oversight hearing is concluded. And thanks everyone again.